Okay, firstly, can I welcome everyone to this meeting this evening of Governance and Audit Committee. Apologies for it being a bit later than normal, but obviously needs must in regards to the authority. And can I also welcome Gareth and Steve from Audit Wales, who will also do some short presentation or updates in regards to this matter when we get into the substance of the agenda item. Before we start, can I remind everyone that this meeting is being live streamed and recorded and archived for future viewing. If a participant wishes to speak, please raise your hand if you were in the chamber, or use the raise hand function if joining remotely. I will indicate when it's your turn to speak, so please then select the request to speak button, which will allow you to come on screen. Please ensure that all debate is raised verbally and not via the chat function. The chat function is only to be used to highlight any technical issues or get the attention of myself or a Democratic Services member. Can you please also ensure that your mobile phones are switched off or to silent? And thank you for that. Moving straight on to the agenda then, item 1, please can I have any apologies for absence?
Thank you, Chair. We've had apologies from Nigel Island and Councillor Jane Norman. Thank you.
Okay, anyone else? No. Okay, item 2 of the agenda, minutes of the meeting held on the 21st of October 2024 for correctness only. Someone prepared to move, please? Thanks, Councillor Hooper. Can I have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Wood. Anyone, any objection to the minutes? Not being a correct record? No, thank you. That's carried unanimously. Item 3 of the agenda then, to receive declaration of interest and the nature of such interest under the Council's Code of Conduct. Are there any declarations of interest? No, thank you. Item 4 of the agenda then is the report of the Chief Executive, the audited statement of accounts 23-24. Over to Matt and Gemma.
Okay, thank you very much. So I've just got a couple of slides to share on the audited statement of accounts. So I'll try and make it seem like 2 slides. So in terms of the agenda, just to cover kind of audit progress, pick up some of the key issues and the amendments, some of the key headlines from the accounts. We do have a management recommendation just to pick that up, and some potential areas for further amendment. Just talk very briefly about the annual governance statement and the external audit assurance, which are also on this agenda item, and hand over to Audit Wales for the ISA 260, but hopefully there won't be any surprises by the time we get there. So in terms of the audit progress, we are kind of largely complete, cleared off a couple of the outstanding items this afternoon. The amendments to the accounts have been agreed between us and Audit Wales, and I've made them, so they're largely reflected in the accounts that you had circulated towards the end of last week, and Audit Wales are in the process of reviewing those. There might be some changes. We're still going backwards and forwards on some of the City Deal joint committee tables, and I think there's a couple of typos that Julie's pointed out to me this afternoon, but they'll be reflected into the accounts that get taken forward to full council. In terms of the Shared Regulatory Services Joint Committee audit, that's been kicked off, but we've got resource constraints on both sides, so we've agreed that that will be likely to conclude in January. But once that's complete, we will, of course, report to the Joint Committee, but we'll also report back to Governance and Audit Committee. The Big Fresh audit is also drawing to a close, and that feeds, obviously, into our group accounts. We do have a kind of ongoing situation with the Renting Homes Wales legislation, and Audit Wales will continue to keep that under review right up to sign off of the accounts, and they're scheduled for sign off on the 6th of December. So just to pick up on City Deal, because that's obviously one of the moving parts of these accounts. So the audit of the 22-23 City Deal accounts has been completed, and so those changes, and they were relatively limited, have been consolidated into the accounts that you have before you. in terms of the 23-24 draft City Deal accounts, we have received those today. As members will remember, as part of the 23-24 accounts, there was an estimate of City Deal costs that were consolidated into our accounts. And I've shared some information with Audit Wales. I don't think they're materially different, but Audit Wales will review then the accounts and our consolidation. Obviously, the most significant issues in terms of those City Deal accounts are relating to some of those complex kind of PPE and long-term asset adjustments that are within the accounts. In terms of some of the key issues, this is just slightly reflecting on why there are issues in the accounts. So some minor issues around some of the pay disclosures, and that's partly due to the introduction of Oracle Fusion. So we had a new report, but that's been corrected now, so won't be an issue in future years. We did have some senior members of the team who departed. We also had some staff on secondment and long-term sick in year. And so there were some kind of people doing things for the first time, but hopefully that will build some kind of resilience within the team going forward. I think there are some opportunities to improve information sharing across the council for future years' accounts. So something that's happening anyway is our secondary schools are moving on to council payroll where they're not already. And we're also moving away from checkbook status and onto Oracle Fusion. So that should strengthen some of the reconciliation there in terms of particularly some of the pay disclosures, but also that kind of flexibility around year end as well. We're also developing a new process to provide some additional rigour to property additions and disclosure disposals, that should read. Not that there was any issues identified in year, but it's quite a laborious process making sure we get all those covered off. And I think in terms of the issue we've had around the kind of inclusion of the provision, I think whilst we've got really good relationships with legal, we did historically have kind of a formal meeting just to identify anything that needed to go into the accounts, and I think that's dropped off the closure of time accounts timetable, so we'll be building that in going forward. In terms of the amendments, so these are set out within the ISA 260, which Audit Wales will run through. So we have a provision that's been included, and that is in relation to a legal settlement. So that reduces the usable reserves of the council by 750,000 and then increases the short-term provisions, which is showed against short-term liabilities on the balance sheet. We've also adjusted the amendments for the City Deal audited accounts, and that affects the usable reserves very slightly and the unusable reserves of the council. We've changed the way that we've consolidated the internal recharges or stripped out the internal recharges from the draft accounts that came before you. So I think the way I'd stripped out the internal recharges, perhaps slightly because of time pressure, was quite crude. So I've done a bit more of a detailed kind of reconciliation and exercise, and there are some areas for improvement there for next year, but that does amend the split between income and expenditure by 5.5 million, but it doesn't change the bottom line of the accounts. There are some changes to the classification of debtors and creditors disclosures, and some changes to the split between short and long-term debtors, and that's associated with the deferred income for social services, and that's slightly related to an issue we had last year, and we're really clear about what we're going to do for the 24-25 accounts. We've also included a contingent liability for the Virgin Media pensions ruling, so it's not reflected in the actuarial information we had at year end, but it is an ongoing situation. It might be that there's an impact going forward, although it's not known at the moment. And then there are also some changes to pay disclosures with the accounts, partly because of the issues around the salary sacrifice issue, but also there's some improvements around information sharing that I touched on before. In terms of the recharges, I've just done a brief diagram just to illustrate the impact. So obviously it does hit most lines, but the bottom line there is 1 because of roundings, but it should be nil. Okay. So in terms of the key headlines from the accounts, so the usable reserves have changed, primarily because of the inclusion of a provision. There's also a small move to unusable reserves, but the pension balances are unchanged and the property, plant and equipment balances are also unchanged. I think I'm on. Oh, my slide's not changing. Sure. Okay, I'm going to come out and go back in. So, just pull it back up. Has it crashed? Oh, there we are. So, I think it is on the management recommendation next. So there was a management recommendation at the end of the ISA 260. So in terms of senior officer pay, we have a materiality threshold of £1,000. So as part of the audit work, but it was also, it had come to light prior to that, there were two small overpayments, so value just over £2,000 and almost £3,000. And this was in relation to some of the monitoring officer arrangements with Cardiff Council in year. There is an issue with the chief officer contract in terms of it doesn't allow for recovery of overpayments. And in terms of how it was managed in the context of that recovery not being enabled, we were able to use delegated authority within the council's constitution. The issue being that decision-making process wasn't well documented and didn't use the official forms. So there are a couple of recommendations from Audit Wales. One is in respect of amending those chief officer contracts, so any overpayments can be recovered. And then secondly, in terms of making sure that those delegated powers are documented and on a timely basis as well. So these have obviously been absolutely accepted in full by management. So the chief officer contracts of employment have been updated for any new contracts that have been put in place when be in the process of correcting the existing contracts for all other chief officers. And the delegated powers, we're going to be reminding officers that needs to be documented. And there's been a recent kind of recirculation of that delegated powers form, and that will be picked up at SLT and cascaded then down to senior officers. And we're aiming to do that by December 2024. So in terms of potential areas for further amendment, we do have this kind of emerging position with the Renting Homes Wales legislation. So we did have a contingent liability in our accounts when the draft accounts came before you, and it still is a contingent liability in our accounts at the moment, but the situation is developing. So Audit Wales will continue to keep this under review prior to sign-off, really. So obviously, if there are any updates ahead of council, that would feed into then the accounts, or would certainly be flagged up to council if the decision was taken, for instance, that we needed to make a provision, and then obviously we'd need to consider anything that went on post council before sign off. But that's obviously something that we'll liaise with Audit Wales closely on. So in terms of the annual governance statement, that's largely unchanged from the draft that you saw in July. There's some additional detail around the performance audit work that's been undertaken in year, but that's the main change to the annual governance statement, but that's also included on the agenda item. And then you'll also see the external audit assurances that the council has compiled into response to Audit Wales's requests. And there are no issues, but some suggestions around minor improvements to the related parties process. And then I'll hand over to Audit Wales for the ISA 260. Sorry.
Okay, good evening, everyone. I think Gemma's presentation covers a lot of the ground which this report is going to cover. So there will be some duplication in terms of content, just to pre-warn you, but I try to obviously minimise that. But Gemma is quite right to point out our audit is substantially complete, and this report is here in front of you this evening to help inform the accounts approval process. As you know, you need to it's your decision whether to recommend approval by full council, and on the 2nd of December, and this report is here today to inform that process. I'll take you through the main sections of the report in turn. Page 5 of the report, the introduction section, outlines the areas of our audit that remained incomplete at the time when we issued the report. And there's 5 bullet points there. Again, some of this has already been covered, but that first bullet point there, in terms of resolution of some outstanding audit queries, have all been addressed. So I'm pleased to confirm that's been addressed and resolved. The second point in regard to the city deal is still an ongoing issue. And as Gemma rightly pointed out, is a consideration now as to what is required in regard to the accounting entries in regard to the 23-24 accounts. But that process and that dialogue will continue in terms of coming to a conclusion on that. At this stage, we don't think it's going to be material, and the existing figures might be sufficient, but there's still a little way to go before we can actually confirm that position. The third bullet point then relates to this Renting Homes Act issue. Again, just to reiterate that, it's very much an evolving picture, and it's going to stay in view really until we actually certify the accounts on the 6th of December. But we're keeping that in view, and again, we'll maintain a dialogue on that particular point. But the current wording within the contingent liability disclosure remains appropriate, but albeit there is that caveat that things can change between now and certification date. The fourth bullet point refers to the Big Fresh audit. As you know, the Big Fresh is consolidated into the Vale's accounts, as the Vale is the parent company. Whilst we don't expect any material issues to arise here, by a long stretch of the imagination really, because the audit is still live, we're just keeping this in view really to address and assess whether there is any impact on the Vale's accounts, and whether, if there are any, how we take that forward. So again, that's something we're going to continue a conversation on over the coming days and weeks. The final bullet point concerns the completion of our internal file review arrangements. Pleased to say that is complete, albeit it's not complete in regard to those areas of the audit that remain incomplete, if you understand what I mean. So it's 99% there. There is one additional matter that we need to add to this list, and that's already been alluded to, and that's just our review with the revised accounts. We've had them on Friday, we're in the process of working through them, and there's nothing at this stage to suggest there's any material issues, but there is that discussion ongoing in terms of addressing some of the typos and a few minor points within those accounts. If I take you to page 6 of the report, this is, as it says, the audit at a glance, and it just provides a summary really and confirms our intention to provide an unqualified opinion on the accounts, which is obviously good news for the council. Page 6 also confirms that there are no uncorrected misstatements, and there are also signposts to page 11 in regard to 3 other matters of some significance in terms of your approval process that I will refer to now. So taking you to page 11, you just move to that particular page. There are 3 matters there reported. The first of which relates to some accounting entries in regard to the pension fund. Now the issue here is that the Cardiff and Vale Pension Fund, which the Vale are members of, submitted inaccurate data to the actuaries. So this wasn't nothing to do with the council, it was purely Cardiff and Vale Pension Fund. And the actuaries use that information to provide the accounting entries for inclusion within the accounts. So, of course, the logical theme of that is that the accounting entries were not accurate. However, the overall impact of those inaccuracies are not material. And given that this is very much a process of estimation, the whole thing of IAS 19 in terms of pension fund accounting is very much founded on a lot of estimation. We consider this estimation basis to be reasonable, and therefore we don't propose there's any amendment required to the accounts in regard to that. They remain materially correct. in regard to this this matter. The second point relates to the city deal. Again, that's been covered in quite a bit of detail by Gemma's introduction, so I wouldn't cover this in any great detail, but suffice to say the 22-23 accounts have now been audited and those adjustments have now been captured within the revised accounts. However, the 24-24 draft accounts have only just today been received, and we'll be having a dialogue and a discussion about how that's going to, if indeed it does need addressing within these accounts. At the moment, we don't think the differences between what's in the current accounts and, if any, and the revisions that may be required in regard to these draft accounts will not be material. So it's unlikely there will be an adjustment required, but we'll continue to have a discussion about that with management. And the third point in regard to page 11 relates again to something that's already been discussed, and that's the Rent in Homes Act. This is a fast-moving, developing picture, and again, is something we're going to keep in view as we near the certification date. I'll now turn my attention to the appendices. There's 4 of those. Appendix 1 is our proposed audit report, which confirms our intention to issue an unqualified opinion. Appendix 2 is a copy of our template letter of representation that we will need as part of your approval processes to support our certification arrangements. Appendix 3 summarises the adjustments made to the draft accounts as a result of our audit. Again, these have been covered in some detail, but it's important to make clear, and I agree with what Gemma said, most of these adjustments relate to a classification nature. And there's only one adjustment that has a notable impact on the council's closing position, and that's in regard to the omission. The omission of a £750,000 provision that's now been included within the revised accounts. There have been some other adjustments, and they are detailed within Appendix 3, but I don't propose to cover them in any detail. Appendix 4, which is the final appendix, concerns this one recommendation we made from the audit, and this does relate to a senior officer remuneration issue. Gemma is quite right, I think, to point out the context in terms of we have a much lower level of materiality for remuneration, senior officer pay of £1,000. I had to stop myself then and think. Whereas our overall materiality level is 5 million. So just to give you the context to this. So as you could imagine, as we have a much lower level of materiality in regard to senior officer pay, it's quite a forensic audit really in terms of those disclosure notes. There's quite a lot of detail we go into in terms of auditing that. And as a result of doing that work, we found that there was a small salary overpayment that was included within the accounts. We didn't identify the overpayment, just to add, in regard to 2 senior staff. We understand these overpayments were discussed at a senior level within the council, but as the employment contracts did not provide for the recovery of overpayments, and a decision, and there was recognition as well that these officers provided additional work over and above their contractual requirements. A decision was made to in effect write off that overpayment. We are content that decision was made in accordance with the council's constitution, and we're also content the figures are correctly disclosed within the accounts. However, the decision was documented retrospectively. It was documented and recorded not timeously at the time of the decision being made. So there's 2 recommendations arising, as you can see in the report. One relates to the timely approval and recording and documenting of decisions made under the scheme of delegation, and the second point refers to the ensuring really that a clause is included in all contracts of employment to enable the recovery of any future overpayments. I'd stop there in terms of the report, but before I do, I'd just like to thank management and officers for their support and good engagement in enabling us to complete the audit and being able to bring this report to you this evening. But I will stop there now, and if there's any questions, I'd be happy to address them.
So thank you for that, Steve. And obviously Gareth's on hand as well, if there are any other questions. And I think, it's thank Gemma, Matt and the in-house team as well for getting us here. I think there's a tremendous amount of work have gone on from both sides here. Clearly they're not contentious nowadays like years ago. They used to be contentious and people wouldn't speak to one another. And I think that open and transparency now in working together is paying dividends, really. And I think, everyone can learn from these issues. And I think, it's that open dialogue in regards to getting us where we are now. So if you could thank the team internally as well, thank your audit team as well for getting us where we are. Obviously, we understand there are some, you keep an eye on these renting homes issues and such like. But, to get an unqualified set of accounts is a good place to be. So we've got the report, we've heard from Gemma, we've heard from Steve. Are there any questions? Councillor Hooper.
Thanks for, and I'm pleased that there's an unqualified opinion on its way. I think that's to be recognised. I've got a few questions, Chair, if you don't mind. First, we've got hopefully people watching this with interest from outside, and I think they'd all probably say, can you give us some more information on the £750,000 that was missing for the legal fees? If we can't talk to that during this meeting, I'd appreciate if we found out at part 2. I'd also, Steve, you said that we've heard all the detail about Cardiff City deal accounts. I've heard no detail about the Cardiff City deal accounts or the differences. So I'd like some more detail on that. This committee has consistently asked for information about the Cardiff City deal accounts. It shouldn't require me to outline what we require from them. They should be able to come to this committee and talk to their accounts, and we should ask questions as we see fit. I would like that to be a recommendation of this committee tonight on the basis of this accounts, if other councillors are so minded. The third question I've got in regard to renting homes issue, I'm just wondering how much of a liability this is accruing from now on, so on a monthly basis. Do you have any idea? And what the impact of that could be? I'm probably asking a question that nobody in this room can answer, but when are we going to be able to sort out the issue for our tenants to make their houses appropriately safe? The last thing, and I think it may be immaterial in many ways, but £5,000 worth of overpayments to officers is, I think, something that the public should be really concerned about. I think I've got two major concerns. One is that we seem to have a different policy for normal salaried staff than we have for senior staff. If you look at that from the outside, it's one rule for them and one rule for another, and that's a real concern. I'm pleased that we're changing it, but how that ever got in place, I just is beyond belief. And I really don't understand why we're now saying, well, because we can't claim those figures back legally and through the contractual basis, we've just allowed them to pass as a payment to those officers. So we're almost compounding an issue that for people who are well paid in comparison to most people in this council, and I think it's something that requires another review. Thank you, Chair.
So in request to I'll just take the four in turn. So firstly, in response to the provision, I think the safest thing is that we do take that in part 2, and we're happy to share a little bit more with you about that. You and I, Councillor Hooper, do have a slight difference of opinion on the Cardiff Capital Region accounts. They have their own governance arrangements, and those accounts are signed off at that level by Audit Wales. And then our responsibility is to consolidate their element of their accounts into ours, which we do, and those have been signed off by Audit Wales as well. I don't personally believe there's a need for them to come here, but what I am happy to do through colleagues at Audit Wales is share their ISA 260 from their audited accounts with members of this committee to give the assurance that their numbers are in good order.
Can I just ask? Obviously, Councillor Hooper's raised that consistently in regards to the accounts. You know, it is concerning that they've taken so long to sign off to start with. You know, we're just dealing with 22, 23. I think that's taken, what, nearly 12 months plus to sign off. And they are providing a function for this council. That's why the joint committee's there. They provide the economic, etc., for this council. It's whether or not, actually, I was going to suggest, is whether we actually ought to get one of the scrutiny committees to look at this in greater detail, to provide an in-depth report in regards to what, you know, they've got the accounts. Clearly what Councillor Hooper needs to be satisfied with, I hope, and I'll be corrected if I'm wrong, Councillor Hooper, is that the contribution that the Vale making into this joint committee is value for money, and actually what they're getting out of it, what the Vale's getting out of it is, you know, it can be quantified for the members of the public, so that actually if we're putting X amount of money in, hopefully we're getting X plus Y out of it, that we're not getting X minus that issue. So it's whether or not we actually ask scrutiny to look at it in regards to what projects City Deal are delivering for the Vale in regards to, please correct me, Councillor Hooper, if I'm wrong, and to ensure basically that that is, you know, that's meeting the requirements for the council and ensuring it is value for money for the council.
Thank you, Chair. If I can just add to that, because I think broadly right, but I think there's also an issue of visibility for this committee of figures that are in our accounts. And all I've had, frankly, when every time I've asked for this, and it seems like I'm getting a no now from the officer, that this is inappropriate for this committee to be able to see these accounts. And there is no, so the democracy is one step removed from the people. So what we're doing is this council are electing people to go and sit on their board and review it. But me, as a councillor sitting on this committee, have no way of being able to interrogate the figures that are there. And that is being denied by the sound of things from this council as part of that committee. That's being denied, I assume, in the other 9 councils that are part of this committee. So we have a body that is free to do, frankly, what it wants, subject to just a number of select councillors who all happen to be from the same political party. So what you have is something that is very, very difficult to interrogate. And frankly, I am, as a trained accountant myself as well, I find that this sort of way of dealing with things is, there's something about the, you know, daylight shining on accounts, which is really important. And this is being denied. So I've got a more concerned issue than just having a scrutiny committee, which is the reason I'd like to push this at this committee, that we ask people to come, we ask them to come in and talk to their accounts as they are, because you may be that there may be certain processes, but at the moment I've got no access to it. So just to add to that, if I may, Chair, thank you.
For me, it's difficult to understand that, you know, the mechanism. Obviously, a joint committee carries out functions for this council because that's what the joint committee is. You delegate those functions in regard, presumably, to economic development, etc., etc. And by virtue of the joint agreement, the council has to pay a contribution into that. And I think, for me, it is understanding what that contribution is being paid for. I take on board fully what Councillor Hooper says, because ultimately the minutes, I would assume, and the reports from the committee must go to one committee, must go to a committee of this council, because they're carrying out functions for this council. I don't know where they go, because I don't know. I think the point you make, Matt, in regards to our responsibility to ensure that that assurance is there in regards to the accounts, then clearly we have to have that assurance in regards to Audit Wales signing it off, you know, the consolidation in regards regards to what's in the accounts for Cardiff City deal, because that again will have been agreed at council as to what the contributions I would have thought are for this council. But it's that understanding clearly as to what that is all about, because they can come and tell us, but you want the challenge, council, is what, you know, in my view is simplistic. What's the Vale getting out of it, and what can the public see what they're getting out of it? Now, whether that's a finance scrutiny, again, I don't know the ramifications for it, but whether that should go to a finance scrutiny committee to just do that deep dive to provide that reassurance and then report back to us, whether it should be the economic whatever it is, and report back to us so that Councillor Hoop and others can get that reassurance. So it's not a cast off and say, well, it's in the accounts, they've been signed off, Audit Wales happy with it, we're happy with it. From a democratic point, the council needs to be, you know, and members of this council, and if not, for openness and transparency, I think that needs to be coming forward. So whether it goes to your, again, you can make a decision, or whether you would agree, Councillor, but whether we make a referral into the relevant scrutiny committee to do that piece of work on our behalf and report back to us in regards to what those accounts are showing for the Vale.
Sorry, Chair, I was just going to say, I have got the 22-23 amendments for the City Deal accounts in terms of the consolidation in front of me. Whilst I'm not able to provide you the context always of why those amendments have been made, I could certainly outline them, because I appreciate you didn't have a lot of information in front of you in terms of the changes to the accounts, how much of that relates to City Deal. So I could certainly run through some of those changes for Councillor Hooper if members were happy to give me a couple of minutes.
I appreciate that, Gemma, but you're not responsible for the decisions that are being. So you're bringing somebody else's decisions to this committee and making that. And I want to hear personally from the people who are making the decisions. So I appreciate the offer, but I think it needs to be more than that. And Chair, if I may, I think the issue should be, and this group should be about trying to make sure that the public who are watching understand what we're talking about. And if a councillor here, i.e. me, can't get to that and is being denied that, I think that's a real problem in our democracy. So I suggest this something we do. I would welcome, I'd love to hear what other councillors on this committee and other lay members would think, because I think this is a deny. We just cannot see it. And if we can't see it, we don't know what's going on. And this has been a consistent, I've been on this council for 2 years, and every single time this has been ignored. And that concerns me a lot. And it may not be something that's wrong with the accounts. I accept that Audit Wales will sign off the accounts. I accept there are professionals doing that. This is about democracy, and it's to some extent being denied.
Did you want to take that away? At the end of the day, Councillor Hooper's raised the point time and time. But the issue for me is what my simplistic mind of it is, what money is the Vale putting into this joint committee and what's it getting out of it? You know, the way Cardiff City Deal spends its money is within the remit of the way it wants to spend the money. And, long time ago, it robbed Peter to pay Paul. I mean that not unkindly, but, it would push a project in one area and not in another. And then all of a sudden it would balance out somewhere along the route. And I think that's the issue. I would hope that you need that reassurance is a value for money issue in reality. If the Vale's putting in X million pounds or whatever it is what is it getting back out of it? Surely that's the question, isn't it?
I won't keep on this, so this will be my last contribution on the matter. But all I've heard, the response that we've heard consistently is this is complex. So the reasons that these accounts are late is because there's complexities with it. What complexities are we talking about? Because just saying it's complex isn't good enough, because that doesn't give me any indication. So I'm here to try and make sure that, as the chair said, that we're getting value for money amongst other things. I think visibility is also important, but we have an issue where the only answer is it's complex. if it was this council, we'd want to know that. And like we've done earlier with the first question, I've said, can we, if it's complex and tricky for us to talk in a public forum, let's take it as a part 2. But we are getting nothing, and it needs to be resolved. Thank you.
Sorry, very briefly. So part of it is because these are a number of groups that are being, so a number of companies that are being consolidated. So you've got that kind of, you've got to make sure the accounting policies are all in line, and then strip out all the intra-company transactions. So the consolidation spreadsheet goes on for lots and lots of columns. Yeah, lots and lots of columns. So certainly from a consolidation, it's very complex for local authority accounts, because I'm only consolidating one company into our accounts. So that is part of the picture, but I'm certainly not doing the complexity justice by summarising it for you here. So it might be that we do need a bit more of a summary feeding into that response. Well, thank you.
Thank you. There we go. That's working. Thank you. And just to introduce myself for anyone who hasn't met me before, I'm Gareth Lucy. I've just come on board as Engagement Director for our work here at the Vale of Glamorgan with Audit Wales. Obviously, I can't really comment on the governance side of things necessarily, but I think just in terms of the focusing on the complexity of the City Deal accounts, I'm not directly involved in the audit team there either, so I can't directly attest to that. But we have got a piece of work ongoing at the moment where we're really focusing on delivery of our local government audit work in a much more timely fashion. We have been dealing with delays since the pandemic. The City Deal is now forming an integral part of the 10 South Wales councils who are involved as part of that as well. So we realise the importance of that. We are working with the City Deal, to really work hard on getting these accounts, produced and audited quicker as well. So just to provide some assurances on that front that we are focused on that as well, because we realise the importance of it.
I'm happy to include a recommendation that we have a report in regards to City Deal consolidation and that, and if then that doesn't satisfy Councillor Hooper's comments, then it may well be that we do ask the accountant from City Deal to come down and explain. Yeah. It is a very relevant point. It's not just us. There will be 9 other authorities in the same position here, presumably not as tested as Councillor Hooper's questioning in regards to, the points he wishes to raise. But the assurance we need as part of this committee needs to be given to it, because otherwise we'll do an injustice to the role as well. And I think we just need to separate the accounts and the assurance and, that consolidation off to an in-depth, deeper issue in regards to what's required in regards going forward to satisfy Councillor Hooper's comments. I don't know whether any other councillors got the point. We'll wait and see once you've raised the other 2 questions that Councillor Hooper's has raised. But, I think we just need to address that at some stage. Whether that is scrutiny or whatever,
I think there's 2 separate issues here, but one is around the delivery and being able to demonstrate best value in their activities, and the second is the accounting issues. So on the first, I think there should be a reference to environment and regen scrutiny to cover that off, because I think it's really important that we're clear about the lines of responsibility for governance and audit and scrutiny. On the second one, I'll, as I've already said, I'll speak to colleagues and we'll share the accounts in the ISA 260, albeit they should be in the public domain because of the constitution of that organisation. But I will also speak to colleagues at CCR and ask them if they can come along and actually explain the way in which the accounts are consolidated. They will come if I ask them. It was being the difficulty we had previously is why we were asking them to come, and I think we've had a bit more clarity on that here this evening. In terms of the democracy and the sign off, that is with the joint committee. That's not an issue for this body, but I think I'm happy to ask them along to actually improve understanding here of the complexity of the accounts, why it takes a little bit longer for them to be audited, and the issues that Gemma's mentioned about the consolidation of those accounts, and how that impacts on us.
Can I suggest then, when they are invited along, that we just have a special meeting to discuss the Cardiff Capital Region matter, because I'd rather spend some time on that so people understand it, rather than lump it in with another lot of items. So if we could just have Gareth, consider having a special meeting, and then we can deal with those matters.
Just to clarify, there's also a joint security committee, which has representation from the Council's Environment Regeneration Committee. So the chair of that committee does go to regular meetings of that joint security committee. So in terms of best value, that's probably that.
Yeah, it's a reporting back mechanism is the issue. Okay.
Yeah, but I think for this committee, the key point is the accounts rather than the best value.
Yeah. The question for me, and I will leave it there then, is where do the reports and the recommendations and resolutions of the Cardiff Capital Region Joint Committee get reported to?
I can answer that, Chair. They do go to the Cabinet. 2 minutes.
It's whether they actually ought to be circulated to all members of the council, because they're carrying out council functions, aren't they? Can you just get some clarity from the head of legal to make sure that everyone's aware of it? It's a bit of I'm not saying it's a thorny issue. It used to raise issues in regards to the Central South Consortium as well. So where do those minutes go? And I assume it's the same process, that they go to Cabinet and nowhere else, if they go anywhere. So if you've got a joint committee delivering joint functions, the council needs to be made aware of what's happening. And again, can I suggest that lawyers just have a little look at where that reporting mechanism is picked up? So we can pick up a recommendation, apart from scrutiny looking at, we invite Cardiff Capital Region in for a meeting, presumably. Now they've been signed off as well, that we invite them in just for one item, whether it's the Chief Exec and the Chief Finance Officer, and we deal with it on that basis. Matt, is that okay?
Yeah, and I think that sign-off has been very recent, actually, isn't it?
I think that, the sign off the 22-23 accounts certainly last couple of months. Yeah, last month maybe.
And then on the next question was about the Rent in Homes Act. There's some of this I'll probably need to say in part 2, but certainly in part 1, and this is a very technical issue around electrical certification of the properties. It's fair to say that the majority of the certification works had been undertaken. There's a real technical issue here about whether the tenants had those certificates as well, and I can say a bit more about that in the part 2. And then the final issues around senior staff salaries. I can note your comments, but there's nothing really for me to add back and respond to.
Chair, can I propose we move to part 2 and deal with both these issues now and then come back?
Can you deal with those issues now, Matt? Yeah, okay. We've got a proposal in regards to the £750,000 amendment in the accounts, that we, because of the exempt and confidential nature of that matter within the accounts, that we move into part 2, a part 2 agenda item, under Section 100 of the Local Government Act, whatever it is. So it's been moved by Councillor Hooper that we move into Section 100. Can I have a seconder, please? Thank you, Councillor Goodjohn. Anyone against? No. Okay. Can we stop the recording then?
Yes, Chair, we'll just stop the recording. We'll go to confidential. Just bear with us. just waiting for the system to get through the log, yeah. Okay, we're back under part 1, thank you.
Okay, are there any other questions from anyone? Councillor Goodjohn.
Thank you, Chair. I want to ask about the overpayments to chief officers, and I want to specifically ask about the timeline of the decision that was made. We haven't been given all the information on this. We were told that the authorization through delegated powers occurred on the 30th of October retrospectively. We don't know when the decision was made, so we have a recommendation before us being told that delegated powers aren't being used timely enough. So in this particular case, which has raised this recommendation, how long did it take for delegated powers to be properly used?
Do we have the answer to that?
We're just looking at now. And what is it? Question here is the officer had the authority to make the decision. What's at issue is the actual formal recording of that decision.
Matt, for me, it's fundamental as to whether or not it is an overpayment. Someone determined to me that it is an overpayment if it's not within the contract of employment.
Yeah, so, no, thank you, Chair. Obviously, yeah, I think there might be a couple of things to take away potentially for Matt and Gemma to look at in a bit more detail. Just to give some background as to why the point got raised in the first place. So ultimately, obviously we've reviewed what's in the senior officer remuneration note. We've confirmed the figures that are in there, and they are in there appropriately. But just in doing so, we just came upon these payments that ultimately at the time weren't expected. So that sort of led us down the path then of asking those questions around the authorisation process and so on. So that led to the point of coming into the report. But in terms of further details, really, I'd probably have to hand over then to Matt and Gemma in terms of the timeline of decision making.
Rather than trying to trawl through a whole load of emails in the middle of committee, I think the safest thing is that we get back to you and we'll give you a note on the timeline.
Ewan, are you happy with that?
I think I'll have to be chair. Otherwise, I don't think there's much more that we can do at this time, other than to say that we hope that the recommendations are fully fulfilled by this council as quickly as possible to make sure that there is proper governance within our delegated powers system and that in future something like this doesn't happen again.
Yeah, I think that needs to be duly noted. But I think, being a simple lawyer, I think you just need to go back to the foundations as to firstly, is this an I understand what the materiality provision is, but if it's not an overpayment, then what is it? Is it an honorarium payment or what? Do you know what I mean? That's the issue. And it's been flagged up in the accounts. Who said it was an overpayment? Was that HR or was there a presumption it was? So, if we just go back to the basics and say, look, okay, these payments have been made, they're in the accounts, what is it? At least they're in the accounts, they're open and transparent. It's that whole issue around that. Is that okay? If you could come back with a note sooner rather than later, because what we don't want, because obviously within the recommendations in the report is to give you powers to make the minor amendments and such like. What I don't want is to say, well, actually, we want to come back here and have a discussion about these issues, unless they are really material. So is that okay? Thank you. Okay, are there any other questions? No, any comments? No comments. Okay, if we would go to the recommendations then, the recommendations are set out on page 3. So the first recommendation is that we approve the final statement of accounts and annual governance statement to go forward to Council for final approval at Appendix A and Appendix B respectively. Number 2, that committee delegate authority to the Section 151 officer in liaison with the chair of the Governance and Audit Committee to make any final adjustments to the final statement of account and annual governance statement as necessary. So that's you and I, Matt, in regards to those points. So I will let committee know that I won't exercise the delegation if I consider it ought to go somewhere else. Because that, doesn't mean I have to do it. It just means I've got the power to do it should I consider it necessary. If I think committee should be aware of it, then I will bring it back to the committee, just to reassure members for that. Number 3 is that we approve the response to the Audit Wales audit inquiries at Appendix C. Number 4 is we note the draft Audit Wales ISA 260 and the management actions agreed by the Vale of Glamorgan. Number 5 is that we note that there are to be further and minor amendments to the ISA 260 ahead of going forward to Council. Number 6 is that I think these are additional now, that we invite representatives of the Cardiff Capital Region to a special meeting of the Governance and Audit Committee to discuss this Cardiff Capital Region accounts. And that the matter be referred to the relevant scrutiny with a request that they report as a matter of urgency back to this committee on the issues raised. And number 7, that the head of legal confirm where all or any of the joint committee reports minutes are reported to and report back. Is that people content with that? Yeah, can I have someone to move, please? Thank you. Councillor Hooper and my good colleague, Councillor Goodjohn, seconded. Anyone against? No? It's carried. Thank you. And that is it. So can I thank everyone for their attendance, for their discussion and dialogue tonight, and now close the meeting, and hopefully everyone can have a safe journey home. Those who are in the council chamber, those who are at home, put your feet up and have a cup of cocoa. Thank you very much.